Hi and welcome back to my channel UiPath with Jeppe for another video. In this one we're taking a look at an activity that I think a lot of us are using every day, but we're probably not using it to its fullest. It's the Invoke Workflow File activity. And I really want you to stick around to the end, because by the end of this video I think you'll see some properties and features that you might not know about. Before we get started, don't forget to hit the subscribe button in the bottom right hand corner. It's the red watermark. And also, by the end of the video, if you like it, make sure you give it a thumbs up. It really helps my channel. But let's get to it. Okay, so we're inside an empty project in Studio. And the first thing I want to do is I want to add another workflow to this project. We have our project over here. The only thing that is in it is the main SAML file. So I'll right click and add another sequence, and we'll call it perform calculation. Inside of this, we'll add two numbers. So we'll need a couple of arguments. First one will be num1, that will be an integer. The second one will be num2, and that will be an integer. And we will create an outgoing variable also of type integer, and that is called result. Inside the sequence here, we'll use an assign activity, and we will simply assign to the result the sum of num1 plus, well, the sum of num1 and num2. So if we go back to the main sequence here, what we need to do here is we need to actually use the Invoke Workflow File activity. We can do that in two ways. We can go to the Activities tab here, and we can drag in the Invoke Workflow activity like this, or we could simply go to the project and drag the perform calculation file into our sequence, and that will place an Invoke Workflow File activity here with the name of the file that we want to invoke already filled out. Now we can see here that if we go into the import arguments screen, that there are no arguments in the file that we're trying to invoke, and that's because I haven't saved it yet. So if I go to the perform calculations tab here and just save it and go back to the main tab, we can see that now it lights up, and we just click the import arguments, and that fills out the arguments. And we'll assign some values to these arguments. So the first one, num1, will be 2, and the second one will be 4. And then the outgoing argument from our perform calculation sequence, we want to assign that to a new variable. So I press Ctrl K, and we'll create a variable called myResult, and click OK. And if we go to the variables pane, we can see that now there is a myResults variable of type integer. So if we now run this, the value of whatever numbers are added inside of the perform calculation sequence will be assigned to this variable. So let's really quickly add another activity. We'll do a log message, and we will simply write result is, and then the myResult variable converted to a string. So if we run this, we should see that we get the result back from the perform calculation workflow. And we can see down here in the output window that it actually does log the result as being 6, which makes sense since we're adding 2 and 4, and that is indeed 6. So that's the basics of it. But now let's have a closer look at some of the properties for this activity, because there are a number of properties, and some of them I didn't even know about until just recently. So let's go through them. First, in the comment section here, we have the continue on error property. That simply means that if an error occurs inside the workflow that we are invoking, the automation will keep running. So we can set that to true or false. Display name is basically just the title of it, whatever is displayed up in the header. And the timeout is a little bit different. We're used to the fact that if, for example, a selector doesn't find anything within 30 seconds, it'll throw an error. In this case, we can set the timeout. For example, we can set the timeout to, let's set it to 4 seconds, right? And then inside the workflow here, we'll add a delay. By using a snippet, we can delay it for 5 seconds. What that means, since the delay or accepted delay is only 4 seconds, that means that this will actually throw an error if we run it. So I'll run it, and now we'll have to wait 4 seconds, and we should see in the output window, where do we have that? There we go, that it will throw an error now. There we go. And that's simply because it timed out. This timeout property, if it isn't set, There's no default 30-second value or anything like that. If it's not set, it will wait indefinitely for the invoked workflow to complete. So moving on to the next section, the input section. We have arguments, and we've already looked at this because we added arguments inside the workflow that we are now invoking. So if we click it, we can see the collection of arguments, num1, num2, and the results. So nothing new there really. The arguments variable property is a little bit different. It enables you to send in the same arguments, but you'll have to do it a little differently. Basically what you do is you go in here and then you need to create a new dictionary. So new dictionary of string and object from, and then you need to create an array of, well, arrays really. And for example, in our case, it would be num1 and then a comma and then the value, which was 2 for the first one. Then another one, num2, and then the value 4 for that one. This creates a dictionary that it sends into the workflow that we're calling. So this is just an option that you can use if you want to. I don't think I've ever used it really, but it is an option. The isolated property here means that if you check this box, when you invoke another workflow, that invocation will be run in a separate Windows process. And there's a few examples of where this can come in handy. I'll show you one in just a few minutes. And of course we have the workflow file name. That is simply the name of the file that we are invoking. The same thing that is listed here in the, well, workflow file name text box inside of the activity. So let's move on to the log section here. This contains some really interesting properties. The log entry and the log exit properties. The log entry property lets you set what kind of information should be logged when you are entering the invoked workflow. So we can see if we press the down button here, we can see that we can either choose not to log anything, we can log only that we are now invoking this other workflow, or we can log that we are invoking it, including the arguments that we're sending into the workflow. Let's try and set that. The log exit property does the same thing except going in the other direction. If we set it to no, it's not going to log anything. If we set it to only successful return, it will just log that we are now successfully returning from running that invoke workflow. And as with the log entry option, we can also opt to log that we are now returning from it and the value of whatever arguments are returned. And let's try and set that as well. Then finally, we can set the log level for these two. They are always logged at the same level. So if we set it to 1, it's going to log both of these at the 1 level. So let's try and run this. Let's go to the output window. We can see here that it is invoking the workflow perform calculation with arguments num1 being 2 and num2 being 4. Then after that, it is logging that it ended it with results equaling 6. Let's move on to the last section down here called miscellaneous. There is, of course, the private property, which you know from other activities, that simply limits what is being logged by this activity. Then there is the target session, and that is really interesting. Because if, for example, you're using picture-in-picture mode, I've made a video about that, so go and check that out. Picture-in-picture is actually one of my favorite features for using attended automations, because you can hide the automation in a separate window session, in a separate window, while then enabling the user to continue working on his screen and not blocking the screen because the automation is running. So this lets us define that the invoked workflow should run in a specific session. If you set it to current, that means if you run the automation in your main window session, everything is going to happen in the main window session. If you set it to main, it's always specifically going to run in the main session. If you set it to picture-in-picture, it's always going to specifically run in the picture-in-picture session. Now you'll probably notice that once I changed these options, we got this warning up here. And that means basically that we need to make use of this isolated property. Because when you run an invoked workflow in a session other than the current or executing session, it will need to be run in an isolated process. So we set this, the warning disappears, and now we can run it in the picture-in-picture session. But let's try something different. Let's just stick with the current session. Disable this. And then inside of our perform calculation, we're going to ask the user for some input. So I'll go to my toolbox. I will find the input dialog, put that up there. Give me a number. Well, that's the title. please enter a number. We'll enter that into a text box, and the value will be we'll call it my multiplier. All right, then we will remove this delay. We don't need that anymore. And then we will take the sum of num1 and num2, and we will multiply that by the value of the my multiplier variable. So now what we should see is if we run this automation, we'll be prompted for a number, and that number will be used to multiply the original sum, which was 6. So if I run it and I enter 3 as my multiplier and press OK, we should see in the output window that the result is now 18 and not 6. But what if we all of a sudden publish this automation? So we'll go to design, we publish it to our orchestrator. There we go, it's published. We can go to my assistant here and we can see I don't have any processes. If I go to my orchestrator, I can see that I don't even have any automations. So we'll add a new process. That will be the new Invoke Workflow File demo. And we will simply click next, next, and create. And if I then go back to my assistant, we should now see that Invoke Workflow File process. So I'm a normal user, and normal users, well, they are not really normal. So over here on the left, I have a picture-in-picture session. And that user will then say, okay, I want to actually go to the process details, and I want to run this as picture-in-picture because I don't want it to interrupt my work. So I'll actually just minimize the picture-in-picture session. Then I'll click Save, go out of this, and then I'll click the Run button. And it's going to ask me because I didn't mark this process as a PIP process inside of Studio, but that's another story. But I'll just click Yes, that we do want to run it, and it's going to run. But we're never going to get prompted for the multiplier value because that is all happening inside the picture-in-picture session. So, of course, I can enable this take control option up here and then enter the value. I'll enter 34 this time. And the process will run until the end, and it will log the result, which is some high number inside the log file. But this is not really what we wanted. We wanted the user to interact with this automation. So what we can do inside Studio in our project here, we can say that when we are invoking this perform calculation file, we actually want to invoke that in the main, or run it in the main session. So we need to select main down here and then select isolated. And actually what I'll also do in the project tab, I'll just go in and mark this as being ready for PIP. Like that. I'll save, I'll publish a new version. And then of course we'll need to go to Orchestrator as well, because if I press F5, we can see that there is a new version of this process. So I'll select it and upgrade it, confirm, go back to my assistant. And if we now run it, what should happen is the process itself will run. And we'll see the dialog box, of course, prompting us for the value. But as we can see, if I move the picture-in-picture, this dialog box is actually not inside the picture-in-picture session. It is in our main session. So if I type in whatever number, press OK, the automation will run until it is done. So that was a very quick look at some of the lesser known, or at least lesser used features of the Invoke Workflow File activity. I hope you found it useful, and if you did, give this video a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe to my channel and hit the little notification bell so you'll be notified when I put out more videos. That's it for this time. Stay safe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.